Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 52. What can magicians teach us about vendors? So, magicians, magic, the practice of sleight of hand, misdirection, wowing people with the ability of giving them things to look at and amazing them with simple tricks. I pull this rabbit out of my ass, and here it is. Woo! Anyway, sleight of hand, magicians, all that sort of thing. They're very entertaining to watch, or they can be, especially when done right. And sometimes even funnier when done wrong. But magicians, their entire practice is to misdirect people from what they're actually doing, keep their eyes in the wrong place, or their minds thinking in the wrong way. And it's fine to go watch a magician when that's what you're expecting. But when you're not expecting to be tricked, when you're not expecting to be fooled, it can have some disastrous consequences. And so vendors can act like this. And when I'm specifically talking about vendors, I'm talking about an organization that you do business with that has a certain level of control over your data or your technical ability, and they can result in some pretty disastrous consequences if you don't pay attention to them, if you allow them to pull a sneaky on you. Specifically, what's going on in a vendor relationship, you've signed a contract with this particular organization to do something for you as a business. Now, in a normal business context, this can be anything. Like, it can be, we're going to pay you to take care of our credit card purchases. We're going to pay you to transmit our data, our patient records to Medicare, Medicaid. It can be something like, hey, we're going to have you process our phone calls and transcribe them so that we can listen to them later. It can be something as oblique as, hey, we want you to log into our server every day to ensure that everything is running as quick as it possibly can. And so, as a business owner, as a data custodian, as a data owner, it is kind of your job to understand what a vendor is doing for you and how they're doing it. Because certain things can happen. Now, throughout this episode, I'm going to talk about different aspects of different things that we've seen with different companies. And I have to preface this with these companies, while I am going to openly criticize some of the things that they've done, one of my very close friends and the security industry at large definitely takes the attitude of it's if not when, or it's when not if you're going to get hacked, or when not if you are going to see an incident like these. And so, to start off with, the most egregious circumstance we've run into a vendor just kind of doing whatever they want and going outside of the bounds of what they were tasked with has been Kaspersky. Now, this is a little bit more difficult of a situation to kind of describe than just they did something wrong. But in the short of it, the United States banned the operation of Kaspersky within the borders of the United States, meaning Kaspersky could no longer be sold or used as a product because Kaspersky has ties with Russian oligarchs, and Russia is seen as an enemy of the United States. So the Kaspersky was banned, and starting this September 29th, 2024, could no longer do business within the United States. So in preparation for this, Kaspersky reduced the cost of their product to zero several months beforehand. And then about a week before the September 29th deadline, they uninstalled Kaspersky from their lab, from all systems, and in its place installed something called Ultra AV. Now, I've done no vetting on Ultra AV. I have no idea what it looks like. I have no idea what kind of a product it is. But this is a circumstance where a vendor basically took it upon themselves to replace the tool and choose for you what you were going to use. Now, your first mistake was trusting Kaspersky, because that's kind of a red flag. You should have had that product replaced beforehand. But in the ultimate, you gave this trust to Kaspersky, and they have now done what they at least presumably thought was right. So that's something that a vendor can do. And if you're not quite sure what your vendor agreements are, any vendor can do this that has an aspect of control over your systems. They can uninstall their tool and install another tool in its place. Or if somebody gets control of the tool, that somebody could do something malicious. They can do something malicious in the case of SolarWinds. When this big SolarWinds hack happened, that was done because an attacker got access to the update server and uploaded malicious updates into the update server, which then all of the downstream servers pulled, installed, and then this attacker gained access to. So it's not an insignificant risk when you have a vendor that's out there that one, doesn't know what they're doing, and two, is potentially operating in a risky scenario. Another organization that we've seen a lot lately where they've been kind of put into a position of trust, but aren't necessarily operating within the strictest bounds of earning that trust, is Okta. Okta is an authentication provider, and what they've been doing is they've had several vulnerabilities, and major vulnerabilities at that have been actively exploited, and they kind of just leave some of the resolution or remediation of those vulnerabilities or exploitation of those vulnerabilities to use the user. They make it your problem to fix. And while some of this is legitimate, because I don't want just anybody accessing and updating my shit, sometimes it is important for the organization to update their product. But also, the reason why I bring up Okta specifically is because it's kind of placed itself outside of the bounds of being able to be trusted. They are continually and constantly getting major vulnerabilities and exploitation found with their platform, which means it might not be as safe as they're selling. And so if you have them as a provider, it could be a significant detriment to your organization. Now, I'm not going to say don't go purchase them and don't go buy their service, but definitely vet them a little bit further. And we'll talk a little bit more about vendor vetting a little bit later. But where we're seeing additional organizations that have additional problems like this is a one called Ivanti. Ivanti is a remote tool provider. They do things like VPNs. They also do remote management and remote monitoring and management tools. And so they've had several different problems with their product. And in fact, they got told by the federal government, the CISA, that everybody had to remove Ivanti from their government systems because of just how terrible their response was to some of the vulnerability and exploitations that were found in the product. And Ivanti has had a ton of news recently about this. And it's just been nothing but a train wreck, pretty much, in their response and how they are operating. So that being said, Another one that we've seen, very similar circumstance, is also something called ManageEngine. Now they are a organization that provides time-saving and feature-rich tools to IT professionals. And a lot of these tools are hard-coded and inline with Active Directory and do a lot of really cool stuff, but they don't seem to be too interested in security, because if you look at the numbers for vulnerabilities, major vulnerabilities found in their products, ManageEngine is like third or fourth on the list, and they do not have a significant market share. So like the folks that are above them are Google and Microsoft and Cisco, organizations that own a wide portion of the market share and have a vast majority of products out there. And then there's ManageEngine, owned by Zoho, who have a significant number of vulnerabilities. And so as a person who's looking at potentially buying a product, you may want to steer away from their product because of how many vulnerabilities exist and continue to be found in their products. And it's not just simple vulnerabilities. These are major ones that have a significant impact. But another thing you have to look at is how they respond. And ManageEngine has previously responded to some pretty critical vulnerabilities in their products with, well, it's not supposed to work that way, so we're not really concerned with resolving it, which was one of their responses to a vulnerability that was associated with arbitrary file upload and code execution. They just weren't interested in fixing it because it wasn't configured to run that way, which tells me that they just were too lazy to understand what the problem really was. So that may or may not be the case, but if you're looking at a product or a vendor and you're looking at purchasing it, you want to make sure that you know who and how you're doing business with them from a significant perspective. I mean, this is what happened with the Change Healthcare incident. And if you're not aware of the Change Healthcare thing, I'm very shocked. But Change Healthcare they are a downstream provider for insurance companies in processing several different things about patients and their medical information. They do pharmaceutical processing. They do payment processing for insurance to healthcare organizations. They do a lot. And they're owned by United Healthcare, which is one of the largest insurance providers in the United States. But about 70% of all medical transactions went through Change Healthcare. And they got compromised and had to shut down a long time ago, or for a long time. And it really screwed with the United States medical industry. And the reason why I bring this up is that a lot of folks didn't even realize they were doing business with Change Healthcare until they found out that their information had been compromised, both patient data, both patients and other healthcare organizations. And it was an egregious breach of trust and competent management that this was allowed to happen. So when we talk about the organization of your vendors and making sure you know who you're doing business with, it's also important to know who their downstream vendors are, who they're processing your data to, and so on and so forth. So, one of the things that you also have to understand is that when you're looking at vendors, you also have to look at how they configure their stuff, because there may be an issue with how they've configured things or how they've organized how you can secure yourself. Snowflake is an example of this. Snowflake is a data warehousing and data processing company. Basically, they house your SQL instances or whatever other sort of databasing structure you want to have in their infrastructure, and then they allow you to connect to it pretty much at will. And their their rates are kind of dependent upon, what you need as far as your databases are concerned. But in the short run, Snowflake, being a database company, doesn't have any native tracking for individuals connecting to and from their service. They don't have that. Now, you can request it and you can get it sort of kind of imported in, but then there is no native way to view that information in a way that makes sense. So if you're a cybersecurity expert, you also have to end up being a Snowflake expert in order to get the data from them, which is a problem. But then over this last summer of 2024, what we saw was, because of the way that Snowflake has engineered their authentication and authorization platform, they left the door wide open for attackers to gain access to companies' Snowflake instances, because they were not enforcing multi-factor authentication on the logins. Now, it is on the customer of Snowflake for reusing passwords that had been previously breached, but it's also primarily on Snowflake for not enforcing basic controls over the environment. I can see the argument for it. We want you to have full control of the environment. So if you want to have specific accounts in an unsecure format, we're going to allow that. But I would, rather than you have that as sort of an opt-in to security, I would have it as an opt-out of security. But that's just my personal opinion, I guess. So, but we see this where you have a vendor who doesn't necessarily control the security flow of your organization, and things can just get wrong real quick. Now, another thing you need to understand about your vendors and who you're doing business with is how they can access your agreement, your systems, your data. However they get into your information, whatever tie-in they have with your organization, you need to understand how a vendor can gain access to that. And so one of the ways we saw this as a negative, or a company doing this the wrong way, was Microsoft. Surprise, surprise. They had some sort of backdoor into, I believe it was the GCC High, which is a government-based tenant for government contractors, and they had some sort of backdoor where the credentials for this got compromised. And a Chinese nationalist hacker got into the back-end systems of the GCC High tenant structure and was able to get into GCC High tenants. And this is a problem, because if you were completely unaware that Microsoft had this functionality, which a significant portion of individuals were, you wouldn't have any reason to suspect that there was a problem until it's too late to do anything about it. So understanding where your vendors have access and doing and can unattendedly or unprovoked gain access to your systems is important. And one of the ways we do this, and one of the ways we suggest that you operate in an organization as a security industry, this is the thing we suggest, is to do what is called vendor vetting. And vendor vetting is basically taking a variety of questions and making sure that your vendors answer them in a way that makes sense. The key to vendor vetting, though, is not just having your vendors answer those questions, because they can just bullshit their way through the answers if they really need to, but it's having it reviewed by a competent person who understands the way the question should be answered and may be able to sniff out bullshit when they read it, or come to a conclusion about how an organization should operate. Now, I've mentioned a lot of other vendors, and there is another vendor that I actually had to do a vendor vetting for, or against rather, and their answers were less than stellar. It was a local telecom company here in Colorado, so I won't bring them up. Plus, I don't want to get sued by them specifically, but their answers were basically, when we asked them, hey, how do you secure your environment? What are the security features around your environment? How do you access data in the back end? How are people logging into your system? How do your support people gain access to your environment? Is there any limitation on the access that your support folk have to our data? How do you store data? Where do you store it? So on and so forth. We asked all of these questions. And the summary of their response was basically, well, we don't enforce MFA. We actually don't have an option for MFA at all. We have a password and then a PIN, which multi-factor authentication we'll go into a deep dive about if I haven't already. But we'll go into a deep dive about it, where multi-factor is two factors, a factor being a different aspect of what you know, who you are, what you are, and what you have. And a factor of a PIN and a password, that's one factor, because that's something you know. That's it. It's not multi-factor. It's a single factor. Anyway, they said that was sufficient for multi-factor authentication. They basically expose all databases to all support folk through the entire environment. There is no way to pull audit logs automatically for the organization. You just have to request them when you find a problem, so on and so forth. So all of these things were a huge problem for doing business with this organization in a secure manner. And I suggested that my company not do business with them, my client not do business with them. And so, understanding your vendor vetting sheet and understanding how to create one is key. In fact, there are some very, very good vendor vetting sheets available online. And if you just look for vendor vetting security and then try to find the document, you'll find a pretty decent list of ways to start. But your vendor vetting sheet needs to be something that you create internally, because you may care about certain aspects of security or how a vendor operates specific to your organization. For instance, you may not care that you operate on an isolated host, so that your data is isolated away from other organizations' data. You might not care about that. You might also not care about how your data is securely transmitted. You might not care about that. But those are good questions to answer. How is your data submitted? How is your data retrieved? What protocols do you use? What tie-ins do you have into my systems? What level of auditing do you do for folks when they connect? Do you do any background checks for your employees? Do your employees maintain access after being terminated? Do your employees operate on their own laptops, or do you provide laptops to your employees? Do your employees work remotely? Do they work in your office? Do they come from a single IP address? Do they come from dynamic IP addresses? These are all questions that could be asked on your vendor vetting sheet and should be included as a normal aspect of asking questions in a highly secure environment. And so when you have a vendor fill out this vendor vetting sheet, you need to make sure that you have somebody competently look at it, so that way they can understand exactly how this organization is going to operate within your stack, and then come up with do you really want to do business with these people or not? The vendor vetting sheet is not something that is necessarily going to prohibit you from doing business with a company, but it is something that will give you an idea of how seriously a business is taking security, and also, alert you to the risks you are facing, you may potentially be facing in an organization that you're doing business with. So again, you don't necessarily want to use a vendor vetting sheet as a bludgeon to prevent yourself from doing business with other organizations. What you're doing with a vendor vetting sheet is you're removing some of the magic, some of the misdirection, some of the sleight of hand from your vendor, and plainly exposing what they're doing in a way that makes sense. And sometimes, in order to have a trick explained to you, you need to have a magician explain it. And that's just kind of it. I mean, there's a whole TV show. There was a whole TV show. I don't know if it's still running, but there was TV shows starring Penn and Teller where they explained to you how tricks were done. But also they had another one where they had other magicians come out and perform their tricks. And if they could fool Penn and Teller, they got some money. Penn and Teller being a fairly famous magical duo or magician duo. And if you haven't seen any other YouTube videos, you absolutely should. Some of their shit's really hilarious. That's my personal opinion, not the official stance of this podcast. But at any rate, you might need somebody like that to help you understand and competently provide you context around the answers of a potential vendor has given you. And so when you're walking through the vendor vetting process, you want to make sure that you're watching what actually is going on and not falling for any misdirection by an organization. Because the instant an organization, a vendor has the ability to tell you that they're doing one thing and performing another, that's the moment where you lose control of your data and you end up getting hacked. Well, that's all the bright and sunniness I have for today, and I hope you guys have a great day.